July 1962, Congo. The Democratic Republic of Congo had been mired in chaos since gaining independence 2 years earlier. Civil war raged between the government, various factions, and rebels, with foreign powers taking sides. Somewhere deep in the dense jungle, a small team of American soldiers had been deployed on a covert military support mission, providing tactical assistance to the UN peacekeepers in the region. The jungle was thick, the humidity suffocating, and the air carried the scent of rot and decay, an omnipresent reminder that the jungle consumed everything in its path. Sergeant Thomas Jackson led his men through the treacherous terrain. They had received reports of rebel movements near the town of Kisangani and were tasked with gathering intel before the main force moved in. The team consisted of 5 men: Jackson, his second-in-command Corporal Henry Lewis, Private Robert Daniels, Private First Class Eddie Miller, and the team's medic, Specialist Benjamin Carter. The mission was meant to be a 3-day recon operation, but something about the jungle felt off. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The group trudged through the thick undergrowth, their boots sinking into the moist soil as they hacked their way through vines and brush. The oppressive heat bore down on them, and the constant buzzing of insects filled the air. But there was something else, something strange that none of them could quite put their finger on. "Man, I swear this jungle's alive," said Daniels, wiping sweat from his brow. His voice was tight with nerves. "It is alive, Daniels," Lewis said dryly, hacking through a vine with his machete. "Everything in here wants to eat you. No, I mean, it's like we're not alone. You guys feel that?" Jackson slowed, looking back at the men. "Keep it together, Daniels. We're close to the objective." But Jackson felt it too. The jungle was too quiet. Aside from the buzzing of insects, there were no sounds of birds, no distant roars from the larger predators. The silence was unnerving. As they neared the edge of a small clearing, Miller stopped in his tracks and crouched low. "Sarge, come look at this." Jackson moved forward and knelt beside him. Before them, on the jungle floor, was an enormous web. It stretched across the ground like a net, thick strands of silk glistening in the faint light that filtered through the canopy. The webbing was unlike anything they had ever seen, the strands as thick as rope and sticky enough that even with a gentle tug, it held firm. "What the hell kind of spider makes a web like that?" Miller muttered, stepping back. Jackson didn't answer. He was transfixed by the size of the web, his gut instinct screaming at him that this was wrong. Spiders didn't get this big. Not even in the Congo. "We need to move," Jackson ordered. "This area is not safe." As they began to skirt around the clearing, Carter spoke up. "You ever heard of the JBA Fofi?" Jackson frowned. "What's that?" "It's a story I heard from some of the locals near the base. Some kind of giant spider. The legends say it's big enough to take down a man." Lewis snorted. "You're telling me there's a man-eating spider out here?" Carter shrugged. "I don't believe it. But the locals seem to. They say the JBA Fofi's been around for centuries, preying on anything that wanders too close to its web." "Great," Daniels muttered. As if this jungle wasn't bad enough already. They pressed on, moving cautiously through the dense undergrowth. But the sense of unease only grew as the hours passed. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the trees and vines twisting together into an impenetrable wall. The air was thick with moisture, making it hard to breathe, and the ground beneath their feet grew softer, almost as if the earth itself was rotting away. Then, they found it. The remains of a village, or what had once been one. The huts were collapsed, the thatch roofs rotted through, and the wooden supports splintered. But it wasn't the decay that made the soldiers stop in their tracks, it was the webbing. The entire village was draped in massive webs, stretching from hut to hut, hanging from trees and covering the ground in thick layers. And scattered throughout the webs were bones, animal bones, human bones, picked clean and bleached white by the elements. Jackson motioned for the men to fan out, weapons raised. The village was eerily silent, not even the usual buzz of insects could be heard. The oppressive stillness made the air feel heavier, as if something unseen watched from the shadows. "Jesus Christ," Miller whispered, pointing to one of the huts. Inside, partially obscured by webbing, was the mummified corpse of a man, his body contorted in a final, desperate attempt to escape whatever had ensnared him. Lewis crouched down, examining the webs. "This stuff is fresh," he said grimly. "Whatever did this is still around." Suddenly, a low rustling sound came from the edge of the village, near the tree line. The men froze, their rifles trained on the dense brush. The sound grew louder, a scraping, skittering noise that made the hair on the back of Jackson's neck stand on end. Without warning, something burst from the jungle, something massive. The creature stood nearly as tall as a man, its body covered in dark, bristling hair. Its legs were long and spindly, each one at least 3 feet long, ending in sharp, hooked claws that dug into the earth. Its eyes, 8 of them, glistened in the fading light, black and soulless. Its fangs, long and curved, dripped with venom as it skittered toward the men with terrifying speed. "Open fire!" Jackson shouted. The soldiers unleashed a hail of bullets, the deafening roar of gunfire echoing through the jungle. The bullets tore into the creature's body, but it didn't slow down. It lunged at them, moving with unnatural agility, its legs slicing through the air like blades. Daniel screamed as one of the creature's legs caught him across the chest, knocking him to the ground. The spider pounced, its fangs sinking into his shoulder. Jackson fired a burst of rounds into the creature's abdomen, and it shrieked a high-pitched, inhuman sound as it reared back, releasing Daniels and skittering toward the jungle. "Daniels!" Miller yelled, rushing to his side. But Daniels was already convulsing, his body writhing in pain as the venom coursed through his veins. Jackson knelt beside him, his face grim. "We need to move. Now." They dragged Daniels to his feet, his body limp and unresponsive, and began to retreat back the way they had come. But the jungle had changed. The path they had taken was gone, replaced by a dense wall of vines and webs. The trees seemed to shift around them, their branches curling inward like claws. "We're trapped," Lewis muttered, his voice trembling with fear. "This thing's hurting us." The skittering sound returned, louder this time, echoing from all around them. The creature was hunting them, stalking them through the maze of webbing and foliage. "Keep moving!" Jackson barked, his eyes scanning the shadows. "We stick together." But the jungle was alive with movement, the sound of legs scuttling across the ground, the rustle of leaves as the creature circled them. Every shadow seemed to hide the monstrous spider, every noise was amplified by the oppressive silence. Suddenly, Carter screamed. A web had caught him by the ankle, yanking him into the underbrush. Jackson turned, firing blindly into the darkness, but it was too late. Carter's screams were cut short, leaving only the sickening sound of tearing flesh and cracking bones. "Go!" Jackson ordered, his voice tight with panic. They ran, stumbling through the thick undergrowth, their hearts pounding in their chests. The creature was relentless, its massive legs crashing through the trees as it closed in on them. Miller was the next to fall, caught in a massive web that sprang up in front of him like a trap. The spider descended from the trees, its fangs glistening as it struck, the venom paralyzing him before he could even scream. Jackson and Lewis ran, their breath coming in ragged gasps, but they knew they couldn't outrun it. The jungle was closing in, the webs growing thicker with every step. Lewis stumbled, his foot caught in a web. He struggled, but it was too late. The spider pounced, dragging him into the shadows. Jackson was alone now, his heart racing, his mind reeling. He could hear the creature behind him, its legs skittering through the underbrush. He fired blindly over his shoulder, but the gun clicked empty. He stumbled into a small clearing, his legs shaking with exhaustion. The jungle around him was still, the air thick with the scent of decay. He could feel the spider watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, it appeared. The JBA Fofi, its massive body looming over him, its eyes glistening with malice. It moved slowly now, savoring its victory. Jackson backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no weapons left, no way to fight it. The creature lunged. Jackson screamed. The jungle consumed everything in its path, and the JBA Fofi was no exception. By the time the search party arrived, there was no trace of Jackson or his team. The village was empty, the webs torn apart by the elements, the bones scattered and buried beneath the jungle's ever-growing foliage. The jungle had claimed them all.